Hi, I'm Simon K. Jones, and this is the audio version of my newsletter. This is all about that time my writing was censored by the British government, which is not a title I anticipated using today. So the chapter of Tales from the Triverse that went out a couple of weeks ago fell foul of the UK's Online Safety Act. If someone in the UK tries to view the chapter on the web and isn't yet age verified, they are greeted with a message which simply says age-restricted content, and they're then prompted to verify their age using Substack's now built-in system. Outside of the UK, you won't be seeing it, and if you're in the UK but already age verified, you also won't see it. If you're a paid subscriber to any Substack-powered newsletter, for example, you're automatically verified, apparently due to having a credit card. So money equals freedom, as tends to be the case. Now, before I get into the weeds, a bit of just context. I am not a free speech absolutist. I think a functioning society inevitably has some limits of speech, and where those limits are is a constant society-wide conversation and push and pull. I also think that a good number, not all, but a good number of self-declared absolutists are in fact nothing of the sort. For them, free speech actually means my speech. They're often demanding the right to be an arsehole, rather than defending anyone's freedom of expression. Unsurprisingly, those who shout about free speech the most also tend to be the ones who are quickest to censor, to shout down, to intimidate and cancel. At the same time, I'm very fed up of the zero-sum purity tests that tend to come from the other end of the political spectrum. I wrote in more detail about that back in August. So that's my starting point. And what follows is a series of loosely connected thoughts, most of which have not been road-tested, but which might work as starting points for discussion. So here goes. First, they came for the fantasy adventure writers. Strangely, I hadn't really thought about the Online Safety Act from my position as a creator. I'd disliked it from the off as a reader/viewer/etc., but had never even considered the notion that it could affect my writing. Because here's the thing, I write fantasy adventure fiction. Tales from the Triverse is gritty and grim at times, but never gratuitous. If it was a movie, it'd be a 15 certificate in the UK, R-rated in the US. Point is, it's hardly extreme. In fact, the overall message of the story is positive, progressive, and hopeful. It might have been flagged accidentally, of course, and I have appealed using Substack's slightly rudimentary form thing, but that would only make the situation more annoying, rather than less. False positives are another good reason why this kind of legislation and technical framework are a bad approach. There's a lot that Substack could do to make the process more transparent. Provide details on why a post has been flagged, for example. Make it easier to track appeals, notify a writer when their work has been flagged, and so on. The system is very rudimentary at the moment. I'm sure they'd rather not have to deal with this at all, but platforms have little choice if they want to continue operating in the UK. Literature in the UK is not regulated or censored in the same way as visual media. Anyone can walk into a bookshop and buy any book they want. There are no legal restrictions. The bookseller can use their own judgment and discretion, of course. If a 7-year-old is trying to buy an especially explicit manga, thinking it's a fun comic about rabbits, they'll hopefully be advised to find something else. But nobody's going to get arrested or fined, and society, so far, hasn't crumbled. Games and movies are different, and do have enforceable age limits. However, this is overseen in the UK by a human-run ratings board called the BBFC, who generally make a point of trying to allow as much as possible to go through uncensored, while providing useful insight into a film's content. Mild peril being my favourite. It's designed to be both helpful and informative, and it's only ever lightly enforced. So a cinema isn't going to allow a 10-year-old in to watch an 18-cert movie, but if parents decide their 13-year-old is sufficiently mature to watch a 15-certificate film at home, nobody's going to come hammering down the front door. The age gate on my post provides no context, no education. It's a binary yes or no. To qualify for access requires readers giving up personal information to a random third-party verifier. To make matters worse, there are loads of these with different websites making use of different verifiers. As such, British citizens are being forced to give up private data to unknown companies, all in the name of supposed online safety? It's very silly, and a big ironic data breach or two waiting to happen. Having to verify your identity and age to read some fantasy fiction isn't a big deal, but what if you're trying to read something more overtly political? Or perhaps you're trying to read about sensitive or controversial topics. Having to share your face and other private data is not a comfortable situation. Or you just use a VPN. Here's the other thing. If I go to a cinema, anyone working there will look at my bearded 45-year-old dad bod and clock that I'm over 18. They might not know precisely how old I am, but that's not important anyway. Age verification is usually only asked for if someone appears to be underage. That's how it works for films, for buying alcohol, for going to a club, and so on. The Online Safety Act doesn't work that way. Instead, it assumes as a starting point that everyone is a child, until proven otherwise. Again, it's very silly, the infantilizing of the entire population. Talking of which, when the Online Safety Act rolled out over the summer, the Labour politician Peter Kyle, Technology Secretary at the time, behaved like an imbecile. Nigel Farage, would-be dictator and absolute farce of a man, had made comments against the Online Safety Act and said that his party, if elected, would repeal it. Performative nonsense, as with everything he does, of course. Kyle, in response, said, and I quote, "I see that Nigel Farage is already saying that he's going to overturn these laws. So, we have people out there who are extreme pornographers, peddling hate, peddling violence. Nigel Farage is on their side. Make no mistake about it. If people like Jimmy Savile were alive today, he'd be perpetrating his crimes online, and Nigel Farage is saying that he's on their side." End quote. Two things are annoying about Kyle's comments. One, it puts me on Nigel Farage's side in this debate, which is a deeply unpleasant place to be. And two, Kyle is accusing anyone who has concerns about the Online Safety Act of being a paedophile, or at least sympathetic to paedophiles. So given that anyone who uses the internet should probably have at least some concerns with the OSA, it struck me at the time as possibly not a vote-winning strategy. Kyle's comments are politically incompetent, not to mention ethically and technologically incorrect. And herein lies the problem. When we have people like Kyle in charge of the country's technology, and they're making such blithe and ignorant statements, it makes it impossible to have a sensible debate about any of this. That Kyle immediately went to the "you're all pedos" angle of attack still astonishes me. Over the summer this annoyed me greatly, but I was still approaching it as a consumer rather than a creator. I subscribed to a VPN for the first time in my life and carried on. So, censorship versus free speech is the wrong conversation. I've been publishing this newsletter since mid-2021. During that time, the internet has been generally tearing itself apart, trying to figure out how to simultaneously provide freedom of expression and a pleasant, safe environment. Experience seems to suggest that these two things may not be able to coexist online. I wonder whether we're always looking in the wrong direction. All the attention goes to the censorship versus freedom of speech debate, with various arbitrary lines drawn for what should and should not be moderated, according to individual tastes, cultural perspectives, market forces, and so on. Inevitably, there's no way to solve that dichotomy. Total freedom of speech online seems to create hateful places. Too much moderation feels safer but stifles conversation. At both ends of the spectrum, you end up with an exclusionary culture. This doesn't happen offline. Generally speaking, societies find ways to get along, despite wildly divergent views within the same population. There are people in my city who would hate my opinions, and I'd find theirs deeply unpleasant. If I go to the pub, there's a good chance someone in that pub holds extremist views, and yet we coexist and life goes on. Why doesn't that natural balance occur online? Why do I remember the online space being much more nuanced and balanced in the 90s and 2000s? What changed? Well, it's algorithmic feeds, isn't it? Prior to Twitter and Facebook, prior to the iPhone, all of which popped up in the late 2000s, the internet was a largely chronological place. Algorithms were introduced to help make sense of the increasing amount of stuff, and that's where everything started to go a bit wrong. Thing is, an algorithm is not inherently evil. They're designed to do something by humans, so we need to look to the humans behind them to figure out what's going on. In the case of social media algos, what is it they're trying to do? Well, they're trying to show ads and sell products so that the company can get more money from their advertisers. The best way to do that, it turns out, is to keep people glued to a feed via anger, fear, and hatred. And if a user isn't feeling angry, afraid, or hateful, it's the social platform's job to make them. A thought. Maybe structuring online culture entirely around advertising views and clicks wasn't a good idea. Side note. Forget about generative AI providing 10x productivity. It's definitely going to 10x all of the above, though. The societal destruction from ads being inserted invisibly into AI is going to make social media seem like the fun times of the internet. Anyway, we're now seeing some governments try to deal with the fallout of all this. That fallout being increasing political tensions, radicalisation of people who spend too much time online, which these days primarily means 40-plus mums and dads rather than disgruntled teenagers. Oh, and also that includes all journalists and all politicians. Not a great combo. And then you've also got a breakdown in local culture, mental health crises. I mean, take your pick. In Australia, they've just banned social media for under 16s. The Online Safety Act came into law in the UK earlier this year. These are well-intentioned with the aim of protecting children, and, let's definitely try to protect children. I'm pleased that these are governments taking this stuff seriously rather than just bowing to the tech overlords. The problem is that they're legislating the wrong end of the process. Imagine a chemical plant spewing waste into a beautiful lake. The government passes a law to make it illegal to swim in the lake. People are protected. Hooray! The nature reserve responsible for access to the lake will get in serious trouble if they let anyone in who isn't supposed to be there. Before being allowed into the area, all visitors have to remove their clothes to prove that they're not wearing swimming shorts. It's for their own protection. Some people will still try to sneak in and go for a swim anyway, and they'll get sick. The government expands the law so those people can be prosecuted as well. At no point is the chemical plant investigated or regulated, and it continues pumping harmful substances into the lake. I mean, it's far from a perfect analogy, but you see what I'm getting at. I would much rather see the social platforms regulated rather than end users restricted. And by regulation, what I think I mean is force all online platforms to make their algorithms and design processes public. Open source, perhaps? Show the world exactly how these systems are being tuned and gamed and manipulated. Allow other coders to examine what companies are doing and point out cynical manipulation. Another approach would be to ban the practice of tuning an algorithm to favour advertisers. I have a suspicion that this would fix a significant chunk of the internet culture overnight. Sure, it'd entirely destroy the current ad revenue model for many online businesses. It would kill Meta and Google's core products. Oh well, never mind, eh? They'll just have to think harder and make better products that people actually want to use and pay for. They can still show ads, but they have to be incidental rather than the driving force. Notably, Substack are being a bit more transparent about this stuff than most platforms. There's a post by Mike Cohen, one of their recommendation feed architects, detailing their approach, which you can find out. I've got a link over on the newsletter version. And, it's a start. It's a move towards the kind of openness that I'd like to see as standard. We're a long way from governments exerting some responsibility in this arena, and in many countries the tech oligarchs are the ones pulling the levers of power rather than the politicians or the voters. It may be too late. Instead, these tentative, clumsy steps from the UK and Australia are seeing people be regulated when it should be the companies being regulated. Which brings me to the slipperiest of slopes. As noted, my fantasy stories being locked away from sensitive eyes is one thing. I'm sad that my work has been affected. Some of my readers are probably sad or annoyed or confused, but nobody's going to suffer unduly if they can't read the latest chapter of Tales from the Triverse. Though, as has been noted elsewhere, the murky rules around sex and violence would also age-gate classic texts that are, literally, in many cases, taught in schools. These kinds of rules often drift to including other content, depending on who is in control of the censorship rules. Suddenly, LGBTQ information gets lumped in with all sexual content, abortion information and health advice for teenagers around sex gets age-gated away at the exact point that they need it. Even if the rules are set up in an egalitarian, sensible way, which is probably impossible, by a sensible government, which is debatable, the long-term problem remains. This is infrastructure for authoritarian overreach. The Tories, who planned the Online Safety Act, and the Labour government, which has brought it into law, have constructed a system that can be very easily expanded to ban whatever the current government wants to hide away. Given that the far right are more powerful than they've ever been in the UK, this is extremely bad timing. If Nigel Farage does get into power, there's no way he'll repeal the Online Safety Act. He'll instead adjust it to target whatever information he wants to suppress. Those on the margins feel this kind of thing first, but the age gating and censorship that's now in place is only going to expand over time. I'm frankly quite annoyed to be writing this post and reading it out to you here. I don't write about politics, other than, thematically through my fiction. The whole point of being a fiction writer is so that I can explore this stuff tangentially, damn it. And yet here I am, writing a big political post about censorship. It's a good example of how the implementation of the Online Safety Act is likely to increase radicalisation and increase distrust of government, not least because it pushes people towards workarounds like VPNs to spoof location. While legit companies like Substack and Blue Sky are implementing the age gate, you can bet the darker corners of the internet are not. Young people are fiendishly clever and will bypass these new rules easily, and are likely to then find themselves in more dangerous territory than they would have otherwise. Where are they going to go for sensitive and difficult health advice if they've been age-gated out of all the usual spaces? This is really the tyranny of good intentions. There's a video game called Papers, Please. It's a very good game, you should play it. Even if you don't normally play games, you should make an exception for this one. As an examination of creeping corruption and the ability of bureaucracy to obfuscate authoritarian actions, it's a masterclass. It's about small transgressions leading to major moral failures, of good intentions resulting in state-enabled horrors. Unlike a book or a movie, this isn't happening to someone else in a story. Instead, you, as the player, are complicit. Each action taken seems minor, almost inconsequential. But with each one, you drift away from your starting point. And by the end, decisions that would have been unconscionable are very possible indeed. It was an important game when it came out in 2013. Increasingly, it's essential. The Online Safety Act is intended to protect children. Whether it does that or not is up for debate. The way it does it is far from ideal. It nudges us as a society in a particular direction. And that means what really matters is what comes next. Thanks for listening. You can leave comments over on the newsletter, and please do. I'd like to hear what you think about this. Disagree by all means, point out the big flaws in my ideas here. I'm very much just trying to find my own way through this and figure out what to think about all this. So yeah, I'll see you down in the comments. And thanks as always for listening and or reading.